Get that light over there, John. Thank you. So yesterday we left off right about here in the lecture outline. We're going to finish that up obviously today, as well as here we go. As well as continuing on with our review stuff and getting missing assignments turned in and all that kind of fun stuff. So we left off with Spain kind of and Portugal coming to this decision to divide up the newfound land, right? The new world into different areas based on a line of demarcation. Portugal was kind of getting the short end of the stick, although that wasn't intentional. It was kind of one of those things. Spain ended up getting the vast majority of that new world territory. As you kind of transfer into the 1500s, you have Spain continually making expedition after expedition over to the new world, claiming all this territory, establishing what they refer to as an accidental empire. And that has a dynamic effect on the indigenous people of the New World, specifically in this case the Aztecs, which is a Mesoamerican civilization. It's kind of the third in line, if you want to call it that. We had the Olmecs first, and we talked about the Mayans, or the Maya, I should say, and now you have the Aztecs. So we're talking about that same general area, the Yucatan Peninsula, southern Mexico, northern Central America, that whole area, right? And as the video yesterday pointed out, one of the drawbacks is initially was a very kind of, I don't know if it's fun-loving is the word to use, but a mutually happy type of relationship. The Aztecs were extremely impressed, I guess, with the Spaniards. Spaniards being obviously a lighter complected. They were on horseback, which made them, look really big and huge. They were maybe mistakenly identified as messengers of God or gods themselves. The Aztec had never seen a horse before. The horse is not indigenous to the Americans. And so that was an animal that they had never even recognized. So there's a lot of layers to the whole connection between the Aztecs and Cortez and his conquistadors, as they were referred to. And so as time wears on, gold is exchanged. Gold was abundant in that empire. Spaniards were very much, seeking gold. And then, of course, the Spaniards came over with types of goods that were foreign to the Aztecs as well. So initially the relationship is pretty mutually fun for each. As time kind of wears on, and it looks like that the Spaniards are now really more of a conquering phase, that now the Aztecs are a little bit resistant to what the Spaniards are bringing. But the problem was that the Spaniards come in with superior weaponry. They come in with the hidden weapon that was most effective in conquering the Aztecs, and that was smallpox. Again, the video kind of pointed this out yesterday. It's a disease that the Europeans had built up immunity to, where the Aztecs had lived in a totally different ecosystem where they had no resistance. And so that disease spread amongst the native populations, devastating the populations, wiping out almost a third of the population, which obviously lessened their ability to resist. And the Aztecs were warriors. I mean, that was their thing. They did their best to fight off from a military standpoint, the Spaniards attempt to overtake their empire. But as time wears on, they get decimated by the disease of smallpox and really have no resistance. So again, we're talking about the accidental empire. It was not Spain's main objective was not to establish themselves as a world power, although it was a kind of a lucky byproduct. They didn't turn away from it by any means. But once they discovered, the Columbus thing, once they figured out that this was a new world and this was a whole new economic opportunity, they continued to send expedition after expedition over, to overtake different areas of the New World. We'll get into what that looks like here in a little bit. So as I mentioned, combination of disease, superior weaponry, assistance from some of the Aztec enemies that were around that general area, because again, as I mentioned, the Aztecs were conquerors, they were warriors. And so some of the other tribes that were located in that general region were not real happy with the Aztecs anyway. So they were happy to join in and help the Spaniards in terms of numbers. The one thing that the Aztecs had as an advantage is they had superior numbers. Well, you mix in smallpox starting to wipe out those numbers, and then you add the surrounding enemies that they had around their general region, and that helped the Spaniards as well. So by mid-1500s, the Aztec population is reduced by about almost 18 million. If you do the math there, that's almost 90% or straight on 90% of the reduction in population, which is pretty significant. And I'd argue that might be a little high, but the point is that's pretty significant in terms of reduction. Same thing, a similar fate happened to the Incas in South America, happened a little bit later on, a decade or two or three later. It happened to be Pizarro, who was the Spanish conquistador who went over with the same type of situation. They came in, they destroyed the Inca civilization with, again, superior weaponry, the combination of smallpox and other diseases, and the population of the Incas of South America reduces significantly. The Incas established what's present day Peru, which is on the west coast of South America. Okay. Once Spain had established themselves as the dominant, empire there in the New World, and the indigenous people, the native populations have been kind of reduced down to, not being able to resist. Thousands and thousands of Spaniards make their way to this new colonial empire for new opportunities. And this creates a whole new social order in this region, with the intermixing of indigenous peoples and Spaniards and Black Africans were brought over for the purpose of labor, and a whole new culture develops, a whole new social hierarchy comes about as a result of this whole process, right? So there's a lot of different cultural things that happen. Obviously, the Spaniards come over with their traditional Christian faith, Roman Catholic. As I mentioned this earlier in the semester, today, most people from that region, most people from South America, most people from, parts of Mexico and Central America are indeed Catholic. And that is another cause and effect of this empire. We talked yesterday about how, when Portugal was given that part of the New World, and that happened to be Brazil, modern day Brazil, and, Portuguese is the official language in Brazil. It's not Spanish. So again, those cause and effects things that we talk about, these decisions that are made, thousands of years ago still have an effect on the world today. So here's what this new colonial class structure looks like, as you can see on the screen there. You have all different levels of mixings of people. You can see the descriptions are right there for you. At the top of the social order in a small, again, this is that same type of feudal society that we talked about, where you have, the most of the wealth is concentrated in a small part of the population. And then you go to the bottom where you have Native Americans and enslaved people, most of them African from the west coast of Africa. That is the majority of the population who do most of the labor. throughout. And then you had mixtures of, people who were born to parents who were Spaniards, but they were born in the New World. Then you had people who were born from a mixture of native parents and Spaniard parents, and you have that whole element as well. And then you have the indigenous people, Native Americans. You had Black Africans brought over, so that whole social structure kind of established itself. And you can see the descriptions are right here for you. The highest positions are controlled by the peninsulars. They are the lowest in terms of numbers, but the highest in terms of their ranking, I guess, if nothing else. These are people who were born in Spain, who are coming over to establish themselves in the New World. And then, again, you have the other groups. You have the merchants, wealthiest class in terms of actual wealth, but a little bit lower in the political status amongst the social order. These are people who really had a lot of political power because they had more numbers in terms of population, and they had some wealth as well. As a matter of fact, in terms of actual wealth, there was more wealth in this class than any other. And move on. I wanted to get to the Native Americans here. So the Black African slaves that were brought over for the purpose of labor, because what the Spaniards had basically discovered over trial and error really was that in order to change the native population into more of a Spanish Christian culture, teach them to speak Spanish, teach them to worship Christianity, and also require them to work, as a significant labor force. It became very difficult to be able to maintain that. Some of the missionaries that were sent over to do the teaching, the Catholic missionaries were sent over, priests and so and missionaries are set up and things of that sort. They started basically complaining to the powers that be, like, listen, we can't teach them to speak the language and teach them about the concept of Christianity when you have them working in the fields for 12, 14 hours. It's just not logistically possible. So in order to kind of fill that labor void, that's when the African slave trade developed, for that reason, to kind of fill that labor void that was created by the process of acculturizing native population into Spanish culture. I missed that last one on that. Well, and this is a long slide, it's got a lot of information, so as you're kind of catching up. If you noticed, yesterday I posted that last slide. Alana pointed out that I had missed one slide on there. It got deleted somehow, I don't know, but I posted that on the stream. So if you need to get those notes on the Fourth Crusade from yesterday, it's there for you. We good here? Still catching up. So if any of you are all from Latin descent, if you are Mexican American or you have any family history in terms of from Latino, this is your history. This is how your culture developed. Yeah, you develop through this process that occurs. Again, we're talking almost 1,500 years ago. I'm not that long. About 1,000 years ago or so. All right, moving on. So here's what New Spain looks like. And New Spain was divided up into 5 regions. You can see there in the colors. And yes, New Spain went all the way up into present day west coast of the United States into northern California at that time. Also parts of Texas, parts of like Nevada, obviously New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, those states, the Baja Peninsula there, that little strip that's kind of pointing down there off the coast of California. And then you have central Mexico there in the green. You have the yellow portion, which is the Yucatan Peninsula. That's where the Aztecs and the Maya would be located. And then as you head further south, you get into Central America, where Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, all these present day countries were once part of the former Empire of Spain. And so people were sent in order to kind of control that area. And I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but the Ecominda system developed. I'm sure I butchered that, but that's close enough for a white guy. It's a labor system that developed. They had to come up with this process. How are we going to, logistically handle all these people and these natives that have lived there for centuries, and we got to try to convert them to our culture. Not only now we're bringing in, hundreds of thousands of African slaves in to try to, to fill that labor source that we've been trying to go after. And so this system was developed, in that realm. And it was set up like the feudal system of Europe that we talked about, where these people, these Native Americans were given lands to live on as long as they produced enough product in order to, pay their rent, so to speak. Again, we mentioned this. It's the same system that kind of developed in the United States South during what was called sharecropping, where former slaves were given land to work, and that was their land, but they couldn't leave because they had a certain rent. They had to pay a certain amount of goods to the landlord in order to, that's where the term landlord comes from, by the way, from the concept of feudalism. So lords, and so forth. So these empires, these green areas that you see on the map there, were run by viceroys who were appointed as governors, and most of them were from that, from the higher up part of the social ladder. They were probably born in Spain and sent over for the specific reason to, to run these little different regions. Some of them bigger in terms of area than others, but some of them more populated, obviously, than others. So you see the 5 regions there. Now that basically, it developed further. As you get through time, you can see Jamaica, the Dominican Republic. You see Cuba and Puerto Rico there on the map. All those areas eventually, and even Florida becomes part of New Spain as you get a little bit further into time. As you continue on, I mentioned this a little bit about the concept of slave trade and the reason that slave trade developed in this region. And again, it was to fill the void of labor when they took the Native American populations out of the labor force and moved them into more of a school setting, right? And they still worked the land, obviously. And they're like, well, we still need to be able to produce product. And that's when, the West African slave trade developed. You can see the map there in the bottom with the red arrows. That was the slave trade. And the great majority of it went to, you can see Portugal is involved there with Brazil. You also see into the Caribbean, where they are, shipped off into the southern part of North America. Some shipped off into Mexico. There's a little bits of Southeast and Madagascar there on the eastern coast were also part of that slave trade as well. And you can see very small, only about 2% was sent to Europe for the same reasons in terms of a labor forced labor, right? And we'll talk about that a little bit more during second semester. And this whole slave trade developed because it was the Catholic missionaries who basically said, hey, our job is impossible at this point. We need to get these people out of the fields, into a classroom at least during most of the day, or into a church, and so that we can teach them Spanish culture, teach them concept of Christianity, convert them, go through that process. Not only that, we got to teach them to speak the language, and that's the reason is because they become more viable trade partners, and instead of trying to communicate in a way where you don't have any like communication network, you don't speak the same language, you don't have the same religious philosophy, so it's hard to communicate in that way. As I mentioned, as we finish up the slide here, that whole process, this is a process that takes hundreds of years. This is not something that happened over a weekend, like sometimes it seems when we go over these slides this quickly. And so through the next couple hundred years, that slave trade picked up 16 and 1700s into the 1800s, and then toward the latter part of the 1800s, it slowed down as some countries, outlawed slavery, but legal slave trade continued on into the latter part of the 1800s. So it was about a 400-year period of slave trade that was specifically done to create a labor force, which made Spain, and then later on, Britain, and then later on France. The United States gets involved late in the game. They made them very rich because the labor that they were producing their product was not compensated. They weren't given a wage, and so everything that anything that they produced, it was a profit, and that was called mercantilism. We'll get that towards the end here. Am I going too fast? Colombian Exchange, you see the chart right there, the New World and the Old World. So we talk about different products that developed because of this interchanging of people moving from one place to another. So when the Europeans get to the New World, they find things like, as mentioned yesterday, potatoes, corn, cocoa, precious metals like gold and silver, tobacco. Those are all things that in Europe, they didn't have. And so, but then the New World, they get, things such as wheat, coffee beans, livestock, horses and cows and pigs, but also from a negative standpoint, diseases, smallpox, measles, influenza, things that were foreign to the indigenous people of the New World. And those things kept moving, from one point to the other, and it made the world more of a smaller place, as I mentioned. Really significant was like corn and potatoes. European diet was not a high carb diet. And so, carbohydrates is a source of energy. And so potatoes and corn being brought over to Europe was a huge thing. And in the New World, horses, like the concept of horseback, became a huge thing in terms of communication, transportation, horses used as a labor force. That was a huge thing. And then obviously the negative consequence here is, the smallpox. Now, eventually in the New World, the people who lived there built up an immunity over generations. And even though it was still, a disease, it didn't wipe out, 80% of the population. The term Colombian Exchange is the term that's used for this exchanging of ideas and goods and product and people through, the 15, 16, 1700s. And it was the Spanish and the Portuguese who were really responsible for this when they discovered the New World. And so, European people who live in Europe, when they're eating potatoes and corn in their diet, that's again cause and effect of this transfer of the ideas and product. So this massive exchange of trade and goods produces a new economic concept of trade, and basically what you want to do is you want to get to a situation where you are importing more goods out than you're getting in, right? It's no different than money. Like when you get your paycheck, and you pay your bills, you want to have more money left over than you have in bills being paid. It doesn't always work that way, but that's the concept, and that's the concept in terms of trade as well. If you are selling more goods to the world than you are buying from those customers, you are going to be an economic power, and that's what happens. And specifically, Britain is the poster child of this. A little bit later on, they come up with a concept because their empire is so large, right? They have India, they have parts of China and Hong Kong, and then they have the Americas, the North American colonies. All of those areas are feeding product, raw materials, and finished product into Britain, where they are then sold back to those areas, and Britain becomes, the new dominant force in Europe as you get into the later 16, 17, 1800s. So this trading foundation becomes the foundation of the modern economy. Instead of localized trading, it became more of a global network of trading, which increased the wealth. And again, this is all based on slave labor. The fact that you're not paying anybody to make the product, or if you are, you're not paying them very much. In terms of the in between, the merchants in between, right? And so again, Britain, France, even later on, the United States gets involved towards the latter part of the 1800s. They become very rich nations because of this. And it really changes the balance of power. It establishes the concept of the superpower, right? And we get into the latter part of the 1800s, early 1900s. So how does mercantilism work? You can see the chart there. You can see colony A and colony B, right? So you can see at the chart there, the two colonies could not trade with each other. So there was restricted trade. So in other words, we talk about Britain, and they had India as a colony, and they had the Americas as a colony. They could not trade with each other. They wouldn't allow them to be able to generate any wealth. They could trade back with Britain, right? So the raw materials would be collected from colony A, colony B. They would be sent to Britain as the mother country in this example. The product would be then, constructed, manufactured, or whatever. Then they would be sold back to those colonies. It would be like someone coming to your house, stealing your furniture, your TV, all your stuff, taking it back, cleaning it up a little bit, and then selling it back to you. Right? That's basically how it worked, right? Now it's overly simplified, you get it. But basically, they went to those colonies, they took their raw materials, rubber, cocoa, wood, whatever it might be, timber, I guess, not wood, but timber, same thing, I guess. Anyways, make gold, silver, make the products, and then go back to your, colonies and sell them to you. It's kind of a crazy way it works. And again, that was that mercantilism concept. If they could get to a situation where they were taking all these products and they were not having to purchase them because it was all slave labor and raw materials, they weren't compensated for it. We didn't, when Britain, took a bunch of timber from the Americas, they didn't pay the people for the timber, they just took it because it was their colony. All right. How many of you have jobs? How many of your people who have jobs that your parent asked you to pay a little bit of money? Yeah, that's kind of how it works, right? You're out there working at McDonald's, you're out there working, and you're doing all the work, right? You're spending all the time. You go home and your parents say, I need, 20%, 10%. I understand, but you should understand the concept, right? So you're doing all the stuff, and all they're giving you a place to live, but it's kind of how the works. Like the mother country is like, we're providing you protection, we're providing you a land, even though it's yours, we took it from you, right? So we need you to pay us a little bit for that, and eventually it becomes in a form of taxes, right? Which we'll get to towards the end of this. And then as taxes start to get into it, where mother country not only are taking your product and selling it back to you, but now they're charging you taxes on the product that they're taking from you. And that then leads to the era of revolutions. And the American Revolution is based on that whole concept, right? No taxation without representation, right? The French Revolution a little bit after that, a little different, but the Latin, Jamaican, revolution in Haiti was another one. So this revolutionary thought of the mid 1700s really comes about because this system was set up, and the system was set up to absolutely favor the mother country, these powers, the Spains, the Britons, the France, those countries, Germany a little bit later on, and it's a situation where you get resentful attitudes from people, and that resentful attitude eventually leads to revolution, which changes the whole concept of the world as well. Okay, it'll go longer than normal, but I want to get that done, and I want to give you Friday to really start preparing for the final exam. So what I'm going to do now is that you guys are kind of getting set up. I posted the Kahoot, if anybody noticed that. Again, the Kahoot is not word for word on the final exam, right? But they're going to be very close. There might be, 5 or 6 questions on the Kahoot that might be word for word on the final, but most of them are in the same, ballpark. So you can use the Kahoot to make your cheat notes, however you want to do that. I'm going to go get some paper, some blank paper for you so you can take those notes. Remember, again, your missing assignments need to be turned in by the end of the day on Tuesday. So tomorrow is the day that you can do that. We have no more lectures tomorrow. Tomorrow you're going to come in, you can do the Kahoot, work on missing assignments. You can start working on your cheat notes, whatever works. All right. Any questions on that? All right. Also, make sure that some of you guys who have multiple absences, make sure you understand that if you have 10 or more, and there's a couple of you in here that do, you have to get a 77% on the final exam in order to get credit for the course. Okay, so make sure you are aware of that.